Hello, I'm Abhay Laijawala, Fund Manager of the Avendus India ESG Fund, the first ESG fund launched in India. ESG is gaining significant momentum all over the world. In India too, ESG is at an inflection point, creating rare opportunities for investors. One of the core pillars of ESG is corporate governance. And I am delighted to announce our guest today, Amit Tandon, who is known as Mr. Governance in India. Amit is the founder and managing director of IiAS, who have been shaping the corporate governance debate in India. Amit speaks to us exclusively. Welcome, Amit. Where is India in terms of accepting corporate governance? Are Indian investors mature? Have they taken it on board? Tell us where we are.
2014 is actually important when the 2013 Companies Act kind of kicked in, and that spoke a lot about governance. But the first important landmark for corporate governance was the Cadbury Committee in the UK, which was somewhere in '93. And soon thereafter, the CII set up a committee under Rahul Bajaj to look at corporate governance. But for a long time, people weren't really sure what it meant till the Satyam scam happened in 2008, when people realized that corporate governance is really important and it could be value destructive if you don't focus enough on it. And the discussion subsequently and debate subsequently led to the certain clauses which got built into the Companies Act, and therefore we are kind of seeing it now. Clearly, there is a great deal of focus on governance. There is a great deal of understanding with investors about what matters, what doesn't matter. And if you kind of look at how companies behave, how boards behave, how investors, the questions they ask, a lot of it is kind of looking at not just the numbers, but also in terms of the structure, the governance structure, the board behavior, how is information transmitted, what are the checks and balances and the controls. So there is a significant change which has happened over the last few years.
Right, interesting. Where do you think we are on issues such as whistleblower mechanisms? Clearly, since the whistleblower mechanism was announced as part of the Companies Act, we've had a few instances of whistleblower complaints at some of the companies. Tell us a little bit about that, and particularly with regard to Infosys, where we've had a whistleblower complaint recently.
Sure. Infosys is a fairly interesting case. One of the things you have to remember about a lot of the whistleblower complaints which come in, and if you look at a company of the size of Infosys, they would be getting about 8 to 10 complaints a month. And therefore, the challenge is always that some of them may have some merit, some of them may not have any. Some of it may have absolutely no implication as far as it's not what you'd call price sensitive information or is going to impact the price of the company at all. Infosys becomes important because the market reacted very strongly to what had happened. But if we kind of look at it and think about what happened, we think the company kind of behaved the right way. So the letter, of course, seems to have been written around 21st of September. Infosys board, one of the board members says they got one letter on the 29th and one on the 30th. There was a board meeting which was held around the 10th of October, and there was a committee meeting a day before. So what obviously the board member took it to the board. It was discussed in the audit committee. The audit committee asked the board to look at it, and subsequently the board kind of brought it to the attention of the internal auditor, the external auditor. They appointed an external auditor and they appointed an external legal counsel. They did all this. At that time, there was no information in the public domain about these steps. So it kind of done it without a lot of hoo-ha being created in the markets that, look, there's a complaint and you're doing something about it. So we think they've done the right thing. Clearly, after that, it kind of hit the public domain and all this information came out. But our view is that, look, the company's done the right thing. Now it is, since they've done the right thing all through, it makes sense to wait. Once the findings are out, they are going to share it with us. And therefore, I think if we are trusting the company to have done the right thing, we should trust the company a little bit more and assume that they're going to do the right thing by disclosing what has actually happened. I guess in some sense, there is a question which is being asked, should they have disclosed it at the time of appointing the external committee?
Correct.
Again, there's divided opinion on it. Some could say yes. Our view is that coming from the fact that they behaved the right way, why not trust them to do the right thing going forward? So we are okay. We are going to wait and watch and see how the developments pan out over the coming weeks.
Yeah, no, I think this is something that the entire world is watching.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
Therefore, I think we'll have to really see how this goes. Tell us, how has the regulator helped in terms of not just governance, but ESG?
Sure.
Is there a regulatory tailwind that we are seeing from an ESG perspective?
Sure. So here you need to remember that there were reporting requirements on a lot of the ESG or ENS data which had been stipulated by the regulators, and most of this came through before the 2013 Companies Act kicked in. Now you need to remember we were in a completely different world out there. The understanding, let me say, the urgency with which we now need to look at some of what is happening on the environment, just given what is happening, the pollution in Delhi or the water crisis which we have, was completely different. So they kind of stipulated a set of data which companies need to disclose. But given the fact that, it was a little bit big picture, companies kind of interpreted it differently. So one car company could report it, vehicular discharges is the wrong word, but pollution per at the level of each vehicle, someone could do it at the level of the company. So what it's meant is that investors have had to do a lot of heavy lifting, provided they've decided to focus on some of these numbers per se. What the government is now doing is they've kind of setting to revamp this, and they're going to come out with some additional data points which investors will be available for investors to look at. That one size fits all doesn't quite work here, because for an airline industry, fuel is more important than for a bank. For a bank, what is happening in terms of digital wastage is more important than for a power company, where coal burning and fuel might be a little bit more important. So I think what you need to do is start and maybe I don't know when that will happen, but have these disclosures which are a little bit more sector and company specific. So that's what we have to wait for.
Certainly, that should be very, very interesting. And what's the way ahead for corporate governance in India?
I think it's interesting you ask that question, because very recently the US Business Roundtable, which is very influential with people like Tim Cook, Jamie Dimon, and so on and so forth, members, have kind of put out a note, for want of anything else, where they've said that the purpose of the corporation is no longer maximizing profits, but the purpose of the corporate is to look after the interests of all the stakeholders, whether it's the shareholders are there, of course, but if you look at the list, it's at the bottom, but whether it's the employees, whether it's the suppliers, whether it's the community in which they operate. And therefore, they're kind of saying that the purpose of the corporation is repurposing it, if I may, in terms of what their objectives is. Profit is not the primary motivation, but kind of doing, if I may say, doing good is equally important. And therefore, it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of plays out, because a lot of the way companies behave, boards behave, the processes are all focused on the fact that you've got the shareholder at the heart of the equation. And whatever you do it with the shareholder in mind. Right. Once you've said that, look, it's not the shareholder, but I need to kind of, minimum wages, raise them a little bit more, spend money on the community, and some of the issues which people ask about in terms of pollution, environmental pollution in Delhi. You could say that, look, that's not my responsibility, it's that of the government. So now you say that, look, you have to address this issue because of the community, so you're going to address an issue such as that. So I'm going to kind of think that how that plays out, whether it rolls out into India and at what speed, are some of the things we should keep our eyes and ears open about.
Wonderful. So profits, but profits with a purpose.
Absolutely. Profits with a purpose.
On that note, I would really like to thank you for your time today and wish you all the very best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amit.